The Mafia boss never knew. She was carrying his child until she was forced to marry another man. The organ music started, and I felt the baby move for the first time all morning, like even he knew something was wrong. I stood behind the tall doors of the church with my hand pressed flat over my belly, and I tried to breathe. The dress had been let out twice already. Everyone could see it now. 7 months. There was no hiding what I was, and no hiding whose it wasn't. "You look beautiful," my father said beside me, and he didn't look at me when he said it. He looked at the doors, at the man waiting on the other side of them, the man about to erase every debt our family owed. I understood that to my father I was not a daughter anymore. I was a payment. "Papa," I said. My voice came out smaller than I wanted. "Please." "It's done, Serafina." He finally turned, and there was something almost like pity in his eyes. But pity is cheap and costs nothing. "You made your choices. This is the one that fixes them. Corrado has forgiven a great deal." Forgiven. As if being pregnant with another man's child was a crime I was confessing at an altar. The doors opened. "I want you to understand how I got here, because if you only saw this moment you would think I was weak, and I have never been weak a day in my life." Even now, knees shaking, heart in my throat, I was already counting the exits. 11 months earlier, I had never heard the name Emiliano Vitale. I was 23. I waited tables at a members-only club on the Upper East Side called the Aureo, and I knew exactly one thing about the men who came there. Never look them in the eye, and never remember their faces. My father owed money to people who owed money to people, and the only reason I had the job at all was that the Aureo was owned by those same people, and it was easier to watch me than to explain where I'd gone. The night I met him, it was raining hard enough to rattle the tall windows, and the private room on the 3rd floor had been cleared of everyone but me and 6 men in suits that cost more than my life. I was pouring wine into glasses I would never own, and the whole room spoke in that low, careful voice men use when they are afraid of the person they're talking to. He sat at the head of the table and didn't speak at all. I wasn't supposed to look at him. I looked at him. He was younger than I expected, maybe 34, with dark hair pushed back and a face that gave away nothing. And when my eyes met his, he didn't smile, and he didn't look away. He just held it. The rest of the room kept talking, pretending the temperature hadn't changed, but I felt it drop in my chest like I'd swallowed a piece of the rain. Then, one of the older men, a heavy one with a red face, grabbed my wrist as I set down his glass. "You spilled," he said, though I hadn't. "I'm sorry, sir." I kept my voice flat and my eyes down, the way you learn to. "You'll be sorry." He squeezed until it hurt, until I felt the bones grind. Pretty little things think they can be careless, and I don't know what came over me, except that I was tired of being touched by men who thought my body was a thing they had a right to. "Then let go of me," I said, clear and loud, "so I can be careful." The room went silent. The heavy man's face went from red to purple, and at the head of the table, the man who never spoke finally did speak. Renzo. Just the name. Quiet. But the heavy man let go of my wrist like it had burned him, and he apologized. Not to me, to the man at the head of the table. And I understood that whoever this quiet man was, he was the reason all these dangerous men kept their voices down. Later, when the meeting ended and the others filed out, he stayed. I was clearing the glasses with my hands still shaking, and he said, "Your wrist. It's fine. Show me." I don't know why I did. I held out my arm and he took it. Gentle, turning it so the light caught the red marks already going to bruise. His thumb moved over them once, and it wasn't the touch of a man taking something. It was the touch of a man who was sorry. "What's your name?" "I'm not supposed to tell you my name." "I'm Emiliano," he said, as if that answered anything. "And you already broke the rule about looking at me. So, Serafina," I said. He said it back once. Quiet, testing the shape of it. "You shouldn't be here. I need the job. That's not what I mean." He let go of my wrist. "Slow. This isn't a place for someone who still has something soft left in them. It gets taken." I should have been afraid of him. Everything about that room told me to be. Instead, I said, "And what about you? Do you still have something soft left?" For the first time, the corner of his mouth moved, the ghost of a smile. "No," he said. "That's why I'm still alive. I found out what he was in pieces, over the weeks that followed, the way you find out anything dangerous, too late to unknow it. Emiliano Vitale was the head of the Vitale family. the oldest of the 5 that ran the city's shadow, and he had inherited it at 26, when his father was shot in a restaurant in Little Italy, while Emiliano watched from across the table. He had spent the 8 years since making sure no one ever thought the Vitales were soft again, and he came back to the Oreo every week, and every week he asked for the 3rd floor, and every week it was me who poured the wine. We didn't touch for a long time. He would sit and I would work, and we would talk in the spaces between his meetings, low and quick, like people passing notes. I told him about my father's debts, the way they'd swallowed our old house, my mother's jewelry, my chance at school, everything but me. He asked why I hadn't run. I said run where? He didn't have an answer for that, which I respected, because most men would have invented one. You could stop being careful for one night, he told me once, near the end of a long evening. Both of us alone in that room while the city dripped outside. Just one. See how it feels. With you, I said. You're the most dangerous man I've ever met. Yes, he agreed. He never once tried to make himself smaller than he was, and I think that's what undid me. He never lied to me about what he was. In a world where everyone lied about everything, I'll say it the way it deserves to be said, which is not the way men brag about it. His penthouse looked out over the whole dark spread of the city. The rain had finally stopped, and he poured me a glass of wine, and this time it was mine. He stood behind me at the window and didn't touch me, and the not touching was louder than anything. I could feel the warmth coming off him. If you tell me to leave, I said, I'll leave. That's the problem, he said, close enough that I felt the words on my skin. I've never wanted to keep something I couldn't afford to lose. Until you. I turned around. What happened between us was slow, and then it wasn't. And it was gentle in a way I didn't know his hands could be. And there was a moment when he stopped, held my face, and looked at me like he was memorizing something he already knew he'd have to give back. You're the only thing I've never wanted to break, he said against my mouth. God help me. I believed him. And for a few hours, the most dangerous man in the city was the safest place I had ever been. I woke before dawn to voices in the hall. I heard them through the door, low and urgent, and I heard my own name and the word leverage. A man was telling Emiliano that the other families had learned about the girl, that a Vitale with a weakness was a Vitale with a target painted on him, that if his enemies knew he cared about a waitress from a debtor family, they would take me and use me, and either way, they won. So it's simple, the man said. She disappears. Tonight. And Emiliano was quiet a long time. Then, in a voice I had never heard him use, flat and dead and final, he said, Handle it. I don't want to see her again. I didn't wait to hear more. I got dressed in the dark with my hands steady, because that is what I do when everything breaks. I go still. I walked out into the gray morning, and I did not cry until I was 6 blocks away. And even then, I cried the way you bleed from a wound you're hiding. He never came looking. I told myself that was the answer to everything. 3 weeks later, I was sick every morning, and I knew. I didn't tell him. You have to understand. I heard him say it with my own ears. Handle it. I don't want to see her again. And a woman doesn't go crawling back to a man who wanted her disappeared to hand him one more reason. I told myself I was protecting my child from that world, from the men who spoke of me like inventory, from the life that had shot Emiliano's own father across a dinner table while his son watched. I told myself I was strong for leaving, and the truth under that, I was heartbroken, and pride is a kind of armor you can bleed to death inside of. My father found out about the baby at 4 months, when I could no longer hide it. He didn't ask who the father was. He was too busy calculating. There's a man named Corrado Falco. He handles money for the Serrano family. He's been asking about you for a year. I don't care. He'll clear the debt, all of it. My father's hands were shaking, but not for me. He knows about the child. He'll raise it as his own. Do you understand? This makes us safe. And what does it make me? He looked at me then, and there was the pity again, and I hated it more than I'd have hated cruelty. It makes you a wife, he said. That's more than most girls in your position get. I said no for 2 months. I said no until the night 3 men followed me home from the pharmacy and stood across the street until I understood the message. And my father wept and said Corrado was the only thing keeping the Serranos patient. And if I didn't marry him, they'd take the debt out of me some other way, a way that didn't leave a bride. I put my hand on my belly and felt my son move, and I said yes, because a mother's no is a luxury and I couldn't afford it anymore. Corrado Falco was not a monster. He was worse in a way. A careful, smiling, patient man who saw me as a beautiful thing he'd negotiated a good price on. He touched my belly like an accessory he'd purchased. "The child will carry my name," he told me over a dinner I couldn't eat, "and no one will ever know different. You'll be grateful. In time." I smiled and said yes, Corrado, and I counted his exits too, which brings me back to the church, and the doors opening, and my father walking me down an aisle toward a man I did not love, carrying a child whose father thought I was a memory he'd ordered erased. The pews were full of Serrano men and Falco cousins in dark suits, all of them watching me float toward the altar in white silk that couldn't hide the truth. Corrado waited with his smooth smile. The priest waited with his book. My son turned inside me, restless. I made it halfway. The side doors slammed open so hard one cracked against the stone, and the whole room turned at once, and standing in the cold light of the doorway with rain on his shoulders was Emiliano Vitale. I stopped breathing. He looked at me, at the dress, at the veil, and then his eyes dropped to my belly, and I watched something detonate behind his face that I had never seen in all our careful nights. Shock, then a grief so total it aged him a decade in a second. Then last, rising up under all of it, rage. I saw him count. I saw his mouth move around numbers, saw him land on the truth, understand in one horrible instant that the child everyone in that room thought belonged to Corrado Falco was his. Serafina. My name came out of him wrecked. Corrado stepped in front of me. Serrano men rose from the pews, hands going inside their jackets, and Emiliano walked into a church full of his enemies, alone, unarmed as far as I could see, with every gun on him, and he did not slow down. "Stop the wedding," he said. "You're not welcome here, Vitale." Corrado's voice was still smooth, but I heard the crack under it. "This is a Serrano affair. Whatever you think that's my son." The words landed in the church like a stone through glass. My father made a sound. Somewhere a woman gasped. Corrado's smile finally, fully died. "That's my son," Emiliano said again, quieter, looking only at me, "and I didn't know. Tell me you weren't going to marry this man, and let me spend the rest of my life not knowing." And here is where a weaker woman would have wept, or fallen into his arms. I did neither, because I had heard him give the order that broke me, and I had built a whole life out of the wreckage, and I would not let him walk in at the last hour and be the hero of a story he'd started by throwing me away. "You told them to make me disappear," I said. My voice carried. I made it carry. "I heard you, Emiliano. Handle it. I don't want to see her again. Those were your words. So don't you dare stand in a church and act betrayed." The rage went out of his face. What replaced it was worse. Understanding. "You heard that," he said slowly. "That's why you ran. Serafina, that's not what you think it was. It sounded very clear. They wanted to kill you." He said it flat, in front of everyone. "The Marchetti family had learned about you. They were going to take you to get to me. When I said handle it, I said it to the one man in my crew I trust with my life, and what he knew I meant was, get her somewhere they'll never find her. Keep her breathing even if it means I never see her again." His voice cracked. "I don't want to see her again meant let me lose her instead of letting them murder her in front of me. I spent a year telling myself you were alive somewhere, safe, hating me, and that hating me was a fair price for breathing." The church was silent. My knees weren't shaking anymore, but for a different reason now. Everything I had built my strength on for a year was cracking straight down the middle. "You're lying," I whispered, but I didn't believe it, and he heard that too. "You know I don't lie to you." He took a step closer, and every gun in the room tracked him. "I never once lied to you about what I am. Why would I start now?" Corrado's patience finally ran out. "Enough." He signaled, and the Serrano men moved, and it should have been the end of Emiliano Vitale right there on the altar steps. It wasn't. The doors filled with men. Vitale men, quiet and everywhere at once. More of them than there were Serranos. And I understood that Emiliano had walked in alone through the front, not because he had no army, but because he wanted me to see him come for me with nothing but the truth. The church went from a wedding to a standoff in the space of a breath. "You brought soldiers to a house of God," Corrado spat. "You forced a pregnant woman to the altar with a debt," Emiliano said, still looking at me. "Don't talk to me about God." Then he did something no one expected. He turned to the Serrano capo in the front pew, an old man named Tommaso, who had run half the docks for 40 years, and said, "How much?" The old man blinked. "What?" "The debt. The Barone debt. Her father's." Emiliano's voice was iron now, the voice that ended arguments. "Whatever Falco was paying to buy her, whatever her father owes you, I'll clear it. Today. In full, plus the insult of it. And in exchange, this wedding is over, and no one in this room ever looks at her or that child again." "Emiliano," I said, "stop. You can't just buy me. You're not better than him if you just buy me." He turned back, and something in his face gentled, and for a moment there were no soldiers, no Serranos, no altar, just the man who had once turned my bruised wrist to the light like it mattered. "I'm not buying you. I'm clearing the debt so that for the first time in your whole life, no one owns you. Not him, not your father, not the Serranos, not me. So whatever you decide next, you decide it free." He swallowed. "And if you'd rather raise our son alone than anywhere near what I am, I'll pay it anyway, and walk out, and never darken your door. But I couldn't let you say yes to him thinking you had no other. You always had a door, Serafina. I'm just the fool who took a year to come stand in it." I looked at my father, who would not meet my eyes. I looked at Corrado, whose smooth smile had curdled into something ugly and small, a man realizing his purchase was being repossessed. And I looked at Emiliano, standing in a church full of guns, offering me the one thing no man in my life had ever offered, the freedom to walk away from him. "Take me out of here," I said. He crossed the space between us. He didn't touch me at first. He held out his hand and waited, and let it be my choice even then. I put my hand in his. His fingers closed around mine, warm and steady, and I felt the fine tremor in them that told me the calm was costume, that inside he was as terrified as me. Corrado's man went for his gun. Emiliano put himself between it and me before I even saw the movement, his back a wall in front of my belly, and Tommaso barked, "Down!" in a voice that froze everyone, because the old man had done the math too. Blood in a church over a woman already lost was blood for nothing. "Take her," Tommaso said, tired, disgusted, waving a spotted hand. "Take her and your money and get out of my family's church, Vitale, before I remember I hate you." Emiliano didn't dignify it with an answer. He turned me toward the doors, one arm around my back, his body still between me and the room, and walked me out of my own wedding through a corridor of men who a minute ago had come to watch me buried in white. The rain hit us at the doors, cold and clean, and I finally breathed. But it wasn't over, and it wasn't easy, and he didn't get to have me back just because he'd made a speech in a church. A year of silence doesn't heal in a car ride. He put me in the back of an armored car and climbed in beside me, and I moved as far from him as the seat allowed while the city slid by wet and gray. "I hate you," I finally said. It wasn't true, and it was completely true. "I know. You let me spend a year thinking you threw me out like garbage. I let you spend a year alive." He stared straight ahead. I'd make the same choice again. But God, Serafina, if I'd known about him. His voice failed, and I watched the most feared man in the city fight not to fall apart in the back of a car. "I would have torn the world down every day looking for you. I'll grieve that year until I die. You wanted me gone. I wanted you breathing." He finally turned to me, and his eyes were wet, and he didn't hide it, and I had never seen him not hide anything. "I have never once wanted you gone. Ask me for anything else and I'll give it. Don't ask me to pretend I could stop." The baby moved, hard, and I gasped and pressed my hand to my side, and before I could think, Emiliano's hand was there too, hovering, asking. I took it and pressed it flat to the spot, and our son kicked against his father's palm for the first time, and Emiliano made a sound I will never forget, low and broken, and bowed his head over my belly like a man at an altar for real this time. "He's strong," I said. "Of course he is." His voice was thick. "He's yours." That was the moment the armor came off him, and it never went back on. Reconciling took longer than that car ride, and I made him earn it. He put me in a house of my own, in my name, deeded to me, a thing no woman in my family had owned in 3 generations. And he came every day and asked for nothing. He learned how I took my coffee. He came to the doctor and stood in the corner like a nervous giant, terrified of the ultrasound machine holding my coat. He told the other families publicly that Serafina Barone was under Vitale protection and her child was his blood, which painted the exact target on himself that he'd once sent me away to avoid. When I threw that in his face, he said, "The difference is now I'm not hiding you. Now everyone knows that to touch you is to end their whole line. Fear is a wall, too. I'll build it as high as you need." The Marchetti family tested it once, sending a message that they remembered the waitress the Vitale boss had once been careless enough to want. I found out because Emiliano tried to hide it, and I made him tell me, because I was done being managed by men who thought protection meant keeping me stupid. "What are you going to do?" I asked him. "End it. Then I'm coming." "Serafina, you spent a year deciding what was safe for me without asking," I said. "You don't get to do it again. That's my son they're threatening. If you want me, you get all of me, and all of me does not sit in a locked room while men decide her life." He looked at me a long moment, and then, God bless him, he laughed. A real one. The first I'd ever heard from him, tired and helpless, and full of something like awe. "You're going to be the death of me," he said. "Probably, but not today. I didn't hold a gun. I won't lie and say I became a soldier overnight 7 months pregnant. But I was in the room when the Marchetti boss came to the table, and it was me who saw the tell, the way his consigliere kept touching his left cuff, the sign of a man carrying a wire, and it was me who said, 'Quiet,' in Emiliano's ear. 'The thin one is lying. Check his sleeve.' There was a transmitter there, and a Marchetti ambush waiting on it, and because I had spent my whole life learning to read dangerous men from behind a tray of wine, we walked out of that room alive, and they did not. Walk out of that week with a family. Emiliano ended the Marchetti threat the way that world ends things, and I won't dress it up, but I never once had to be afraid of them again." "You saw it," Emiliano said after, staring at me like a miracle he'd been too stupid to understand. "A whole room of my best men, and it was you. I've been reading men like him since I was 17, I said. "You all think you're so hard to read. You're just used to no one looking. I looked at you, remember? First night. Against the rules. Best thing that ever happened to me," he said, and he meant it with his whole ruined heart. Corrado Falco tried one last thing, because small men always do. He went to the courts with lawyers, claiming a signed marriage contract and a paid debt entitled him to something. Money, the humiliation of a suit, dragging my name through the mud. Emiliano wanted to make him disappear. I told him no. "Not that way," I said. "I don't want our son's first story about his mother to be that she needed a man to bury her problems. Let me handle Corrado. My way." And I did. I had spent a year in that world with my eyes open, and money that moves in the dark leaves prints if you know where to look. I gathered enough of his own careful paper trail to hand the Serranos a reason to be furious with him that had nothing to do with me. Skimming. The one sin that world never forgives. I gave it to Tommaso Serrano myself, in a cafe, alone, and watched the old man understand that his careful money man had been robbing him for years. Corrado didn't need to be made to disappear after that. His own family did it for me, and I never had to raise my hand or my voice. "Remind me never to make you angry," Emiliano said when I told him. "You made me angry for a whole year," I said. "You're still paying that off. I'll pay it the rest of my life." Good. Our son was born on a bright, cold morning 3 weeks later, and Emiliano, who had faced down 5 families without blinking, nearly fainted in the delivery room and had to sit with his head between his knees, while I laughed at him through the pain. We named him Tomà, after Emiliano's father, the man shot across a dinner table, so the name would mean something living now instead of only grief. When they put him in Emiliano's arms, that huge, terrible man went so still and so soft, the nurses stared, and he looked at me over our son's head and said, "You gave me this. After everything I took from you, you gave me this." "I didn't give it to you," I said, exhausted and happy and honest. "I chose to share it. That's different. Don't ever forget the difference." "Never," he said. "I swear it on him." We married in the spring, in the same house he deeded to me. Small, no families with guns in the pews, just the people we'd decided to keep. I wore a dress that fit me and hid nothing and needed to hide nothing. My father came, humbled and quiet, and I let him hold his grandson because a child should have every grandparent willing to love him. But I never again let him think he had a say over my life, and he never tried. I still watch the exits. I don't think a woman like me ever fully stops. The city outside our walls is still dangerous, still run in the dark by men who speak in low voices because they're afraid of each other. Emiliano is still what he is, I made my peace with that the way you make peace with the weather. But I made him promise me one thing before I ever said yes. That Toma would have the choice I fought so hard for. That our son would grow up free to walk out of this world if he wanted. That he'd never be a payment or a piece of leverage or a boy watching his father die across a table. Emiliano promised. And Emiliano has never lied to me. Tonight the house is quiet. Our son is asleep down the hall. And Emiliano is beside me at the tall window over the whole dark spread of the city. One arm around me, his hand resting the way it likes to now, flat and warm over the small of my back where he can feel me breathe. Outside it's raining again. The same rain from that first night at the Oreo, rattling the glass. I used to think the safest place in the world was 6 blocks away from any man who could hurt me. That strength meant never letting anyone stand between me and the door. I was wrong about one thing, and only one. He stood in the door, in a church full of guns, with nothing but the truth in his hands, and he held it open and let me choose. That's the whole difference between a man who owns you and a man who's yours. The rain keeps falling on a city that will never be gentle, but his hand is warm against my back, and our son is breathing soft down the hall, and for the first time in my whole life, the silence in a house doesn't frighten me. It's just the sound of us, safe and staying. I'm not going anywhere, and neither is he, and that, finally, is a debt I'm glad to owe.